Now when you're putting the muffler on these things, before you tighten these two in there, set a screw down in here where it goes into the case so it aligns it properly. You can go around the circles and that a couple of times. So these don't have a paper gasket. These have a gasket made of copper. So I'm going to just try bolting it together and tighten things up and just see if it runs. Now this was that one I had in the video several years back when they first came out. And it went out to long-term testing. And I guess part of what I want to know is, without me going there and replacing parts and stuff like that, is how much time can you really get out of a saw like this? You know, the guy who runs it makes his living doing firewood. So it's pretty important to him for it to work. So what I'm guessing is that cylinder bolt was never installed. So when it was put together over in China, this is a pre-built, that thing probably had fallen out and just got trapped between the muffler and the cases now for 2 years. And you can see where, I'll probably take a picture and fold it in. You can see the slot where it was riding underneath the muffler and being pushed into the cases. Fact of the matter is, there's no possible way that it could have rattled up and fell there. So I'm going to guess it never ever was there. Well, I found a broken pull start, so I'm going to replace it with a Highway branded one. Yeah, when you do the pull start pulley, you've got to capture that with this little slot in there. So. Alright, now we gotta see if we have a cylinder leak. Alright, let's brake clean this damn thing. See if it'll... It's leaking under the muffler. Well, that was never going to work. Paper gasket in this damn thing. How the heck was that supposed to work? Doesn't seem like it's any worse for wear. We're running on a diet of dirt now for quite some time. But it seems like it survived. I don't see excessive wear anywhere. So when you do this, one of the things is you got to make sure that those cylinder screws are down in the cylinder before you let it down in. You know, when it's right about there, just set them in. This one in particular can only go in from the side. Same from here, it can't come in from the front. So once you got the cylinder down too far, you won't be able to get them in. And then stuff that boot before you settle it down. Stuff that boot down in there too. Right in here, the intake boot. I think this ought to run quite a bit better now. So the takeaway is that as it was delivered, the blue ones here, this was a G660 pre-built from Holes Forma, had a paper gasket which blew out. The reason why it blew out is one of the cylinder bolts was not installed. It was laying underneath the muffler, probably that way from the factory. So that's not good, right? And we broke this. So I put a highway pulley in there. That ought to make a bit of difference. And I put the cylinder on with a highway branded copper gasket and 1184, so it may have a little less compression because that copper gasket is probably thicker than the paper one that was in there. But as much as it's a problem, right, my takeaway is this damn thing is rugged because it survived it. Now let's see if we can get it to fire. Oh yeah. much better. Let's see if it restarts. I would say that is a repair that worked. Oh, it's a gorgeous day out. You know, it's mid-April. We just got through some actually fairly significant weather events, and this is the other side of it. I think winter has one more to do before we're done, but I'm going to enjoy the spring-like weather now while I can. Now eventually today I'm taking down that one ash tree right there because it's sitting there. It needs to come down. No particular reason other than I want the saw log, and I want to get the ash trees done before the bug gets them. So while it still has some value, I'm going to take it. But that's not what I came to talk about today. I want to go back over a little bit of my experience with aftermarket and some of the Farmertec stuff in particular. And this is a story which has been in play since about 2013. And this saw right here is a 372 X-Torque bottom end that I put a Farmertec big bore top end on. And I'm not sure how it survived, other than it still runs. We're going to tear it apart at some point, I think. And that 372 experience I had, I don't know. I guess I can summarize it this way. That one still runs, but every other one that I built or bought had the bottom ends go out on them after, I don't know, a few months of hard use. So most of them had their chance at professional use, but they didn't survive at the bottom end. Base material was soft and they got pounded out. And I'm going to stress that's every one. There is really no exceptions. The ones that didn't fail, or like that one right there, was based on a OEM bottom end, right? The last one in the series I did was that X-Torque, which went out to Matt, the logger, and he beat it up in 6 months and died. The bottom end went on that one. In that case, it was both the PTO bearing and the rod bearing. And I think what happened was he just freaking ran it after the PTO bearing began to go away, and that thing, it still ran, rattled, but it ran. And the misalignment in the crank to the connecting rod eventually took out the rod bearing as well. So it was a spectacular failure. But you got to look at it from 2 points of view. Did that saw do enough work to pay for itself? And the answer is, well, absolutely it did. And the second thing is a hobbyist ever going to put as much time on it as what Matt did? And I'm going to say probably not. And that kind of rolls back into my world, because I'm somewhere in between a hobbyist and a person who makes a living with a saw, because I do enough work around here and I sell some of the results to where I'm kind of in that middle ground. I consider myself neither an expert nor a pro, and I consider myself as someone who falls firmly into the hobbyist side of things, but I dabble into the production side from time to time, like you saw this last fall, and probably for the rest of the summer into next year as well. But back to Farmertec. So the original introduction to me was the 372s, and that was in the form of the big bore top ends, of which I made a couple of them, and they all did pretty well, right? And then when they started selling the pre-builts and the kits, I dabbled again, and I had initially some good results. I liked what I saw, but they didn't survive. Now, I'm going to stress that they didn't survive in my world because I bounced them all into Matt's world, and he killed all of them, and I killed the ones that he didn't kill, doing effectively production work. But for the typical hobbyist, where they might run a week or two every year heavy, then once in a while at get-togethers, I don't think they would have failed. I think they would have been just fine. And in particular, that X-Torque would have been a lot of fun. So it's not a absolute slam dunk knock against the 372 Farmertec, and this is going to be a theme. It's just that depending on what you expect to get out of them and how much work you expect to get out of them, you got to have an expectation level that's realistic. I guess I would say they're okay for a hobbyist, but I certainly wouldn't try to put them into a production world. I don't think they're going to hold up. When I got into the 660s, I didn't know what to expect. Now, I've had a lot of time on these. This one right here is the first of the pre-built 660s I experienced. It came back with an interesting set of problems, of which I will document. But it runs now, runs good. And the takeaway for me was that I probably would have been better off with a kit on that 660 because that was not assembled properly. It was assembled with the cylinder missing up one of the cylinder screws. It had a paper gasket versus the copper gasket, and that's what failed because it just couldn't handle the pressure of running with 3 screws versus 4. Otherwise it probably would have survived, and blew out, and then everything got loose and everything rattled apart. I'll show a little bit of that in the video. But that saw there actually spent 2 years in the firewood world. A professional who does firewood for a living is using this one along with a big Husky 395, and before that he had this one. This was one of my early 660s. Look what happened to it. For whatever reason, it just corroded to the point where it put holes in the case and failed. And the cases themselves just literally corroded away. So this was my first catastrophic failure on a 660. And that one was built, I think, in 2014. This one right here, it goes fine. Nothing's failed on that one. It runs good. I might use it today. So that one there, along with the Farmer Jones build, which is also running just fine, thank you very much. They've given me a pretty positive experience. They still run. They did not blow up and come apart like the 372s did. For that matter, they've been proven to be pretty rugged. But like with this blue one right here, every once in a while you got to go back and redo what was done. If you do it with a kit, you know, you build with some better parts. Like this one here has a better handle, and you know, there's a bunch of stuff I did on this saw here to make it better than as it came in the kit. Decomp from Husky, you know, just a bunch of things that are different on this one. I can't remember all of them. Things like the bar studs. I had gone through years back and done a video on what I do to make those things more useful. Things like the gaskets underneath these things are the O-ring seals. The bar adjuster. Just a lot of stuff like that. I think that one there is worth the money spent, really. You know, this one here, like I said, it failed, but I was able to use a gasket kit from HLSupply and put it back together with the parts that came with the saw. So I didn't have to add any additional parts. I just had to reassemble the parts that were with the saw already. And that thing already has 2 years on it, like I said, and it just came back. So that saw there, missing a cylinder screw, had a paper gasket underneath the cylinder that blew out, broke the pulley, broke the pull start cord, but other than that, has produced firewood for 2 years. And I have a hunch that now that we put it back together with 4 screws instead of 3, a Highway branded pulley and some genuine Husqvarna pull cord, that's going to last another few years. It's not going to do anything like what this one did that corroded apart. So the 660 experience, yet again a mixed bag, but I've got samples from 2014, 2015 that survived. I'd say of the 15 or so I did, that was the only one that had catastrophic failure because of parts that came from Farmertec. I had another couple that failed when I put a top end on from, I guess it was one of the Taiwanese companies, and the bore was out of line with the crank and it took out the rod bearing on 2 in a row, 2 cases. I thought it was Farmertec's problem. It wasn't. It was the cylinder. But it took a fair amount of analysis to find that. But other than those saws have been fairly good. Now, my experience with these have been just nothing but frustration. I just never did get them to run. I just gave up on them. After developing these to a useful form and then putting them out in the production world where they actually worked for a living, when I got to these and started having to see the same kind of problems, I just said screw it, and I put them on the shelf and really haven't put time into them. This one came my way, and when I first got it didn't oil, right? But I got another oil pump for it, and to this point in time, I would have to say that 288 looks to me like it's going to be the most solid of all of them, of all the Farmertecs I've dealt with, including the 660. And I don't really know how to quantify that just yet, but it's like the feel of the plastic parts. I got to look on the inside of it, and it just seems like it's a little bit above in terms of quality as compared to the whole 660 line. Having said that, the 660s have proven themselves to be workable. You can turn them into a useful and reliable saw. And I would say the chances of you running into something like this are pretty small. That's not going to happen. Most of them will have issues like this one right here, which are solvable with the parts that came with the saw. 372? Well, I don't know. I think I would stick OEM. That's my takeaway from those. I don't think there's anything aftermarket for 372 that I'd want to put on an OEM saw. Plus, even with the X-Torques, there's enough of them around, enough parts around, and the OEM parts are cheap enough. I think I would just stay OEM. I wouldn't venture into the aftermarket world in those. That's my humble opinion. Now, they had some issues in the beginning, and I'm going to say right now that the new versions of the 562 and 555 are very, very solid saws. They've made significant changes and upgrades, and as I've said before in a variety of videos, that starting out with an old one, you can retrofit new parts and basically bring it up to spec. And one of my all-time favorite chassis to build, right? I enjoy those. I really like that saw. My bling saw right there has been a very reliable saw and very useful for the last couple of years. I had one like it before I built, and that thing is out there cutting wood for a pro. Those have been solid saws, but they did not start without issues. So when we go back and look at this, this versus this, statistically I may have had less issues with the 562 once I got them debugged. The point is I had to debug the first set of 562s I dealt with from 2011 to about 2014, just like I had to debug these. Okay, so which is better, right? Well, once these have been debugged, and now that they're been debugged at the factory, I would say that those are obviously a better choice for a pro, right? They're solid saws. But to say that just because they had a brand name and they're made by the original manufacturer, they're less likely to have issues, belies the facts. I had just as many issues with those in the beginning as I had with these. Bearings, all kinds of stuff. Now, I have to say, a stock 562 is going to outlast any of these, Let's see how hard it is to get an Autotunes start. This one here is supposed to have a problem. I don't know what the problem is, but it's supposed to have one. So let's see if it'll start. See, that's what I like about my Autotunes, is 3 or 4 pulls every time. And the 565, last time it was run, it was at 40 degrees and raining. And the other two, the 555s and 562, the last time they were run, it was below freezing. I don't know about the one that's supposed to have a problem, but there it sits idling. I'm going to let them idle for 3 minutes, and then I'm going to shut them off, and we'll see if they fire up again. Alright, 3 minutes is up. I'm going to shut them all off, and then I'm going to let them sit for a couple of minutes, and we're going to do a restart and see if they all restart. This one's supposed to have a problem, but I'm not seeing it. All right, they got about 5 minutes on them. Let's see if they fire. Letting them idle for 3 minutes is how you do a reset to the Autotunes low speed side of the carburetor. And sometimes if you have a trouble with one of these things, the 2 things you do for field reset is that 3 minute idle. Sometimes you got to rev it up and let it change itself a little bit before it'll actually idle. Once you get that 3 minutes idle time in, it's reset to whatever your temperature and fuel conditions are now. And that, along with a 40-second cut, will reset the high side. So that's how you do field resets. Well, this one here obviously doesn't need it. The last time I ran this, it was like 40 degrees and raining, so it already reset itself. Can't beat that. So I'm going to take each of these and then do a reset on the high side once I get the tree down. Alright, this next set are a mix of bigger bore aftermarket saws. Let's see how hard it is to get one of those things started. And remember, if you're trying to go to work, this matters. If you're just going to play out in the woods, it doesn't really freaking matter, does it? But this is the kind of thing that decides for me whether or not I want to carry a saw with me out in the woods. How easy it is to start, and more importantly, how easy it is to restart. I don't mind getting started the truck, but when I get out there and get work done with them, and I have to put them down, I don't want to burn up all my fuel. So it's not going to stay idling the whole time, right? So I shut it off and do some work, and let's see how hard it is to get these saws started. If I can get it fired in 8 pulls, I'm lucky. much all these saws were tuned for winter time with the exception of bling saw. So at this point in time, since it's not an auto tune, to be fair, I would have to lean them out just a little bit. But that's my whole point. You don't have to do that with the auto tunes. They're just going to run without any of that kind of messing around. And I'm surprised they got old bling saw going that quick. But that's typical with any carbureted saw. I'd get the same issue if I had a 372. Now once I have the 372 up and running, like this one right here has got a OEM carb on it, OEM ignition. Then they're like 3 or 4 pull starters the next day. But when you first pull them out of the truck after having them sit and they were running in a different season, this is not unusual. And that's the difference between auto tune and carbureted saws. So at this point in time, if I really want to get work done, I'm still going back to my auto tunes. And of these saws, I don't know, this guy right here was the easiest one to get started. So this was the G660. Now, it's not fair because last time I ran this, it was single digits. So if I tune this, it'll start easier to match that 660, which I just tuned yesterday. But that's the whole point, is I got to tune it. So I've been wanting to do this for a while, and what I did here was I set it up to where there'll be a pull, because I've been yipping for quite a while about bore cut and stuff like that. So what I did in this one right here is I did your standard, you know, game of logging style cut, right? And instead of doing my normal bore cut all the way across about 2/3 of the hinge, I just went and poked from the back and cut half of it out so you can see this difference from one side to the next. And as you can see, I lost a good chunk of that log because of a pull that initiated by having too much hinge. So, you know, I was going to do a big video on this because you got a lot of people saying, oh, you have to do one thing or another. But I wanted to come up with a proof positive as to why I do what I do. Now, the salvage this log, I'm going to go cut up there. So I've just lost a little piece of it. But I wanted to see if I could set it up. This happened to be a heavy lean, so it worked to my favor. And yet again, I did a standard face cut. But what I did was I left more hinge than I normally would leave. And I just poked through the back to get like half it over here. So had I cut all the way to here, I would have had a little pull like that instead of one like that. I can't think of a more graphic way of explaining why I do the bore cut the way I do.